Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am Jeremy Fennessy, a cloud architect at Alcor Solutions, and I'm excited to kick off another session of this amazing knowledge-driven series of insightful talks, Evolve. It gives me great pleasure to lead this session among a global audience in Alcor family. Without further ado, let me welcome and introduce you to our guests today. John Mohr is CIO of MacArthur Foundation, a global entity that supports people and organizations working to address a variety of complex societal challenges. He oversees foundation-wide technology services and planning and is responsible for developing a strong and sustainable information technology infrastructure. As a leader within the foundation management team, John provides oversight, vision, planning, development, and strategy for the foundation. Prior to joining MacArthur Foundation in 2012, John was Director of Academic Systems at the University of Chicago. And prior to that, John led IT teams at early stage technology companies in Seattle. Suresh Mathew is founder and CEO of Sedai, an autonomous cloud management company. Sedai is building the future of SRE platforms, where test environments are optional, remediation is autonomous, and setup takes minutes. With a perfect blend of technical and managerial skills, Suresh specializes in SRE, Java, cloud, distributed tracing, serverless, Kubernetes, large-scale infrastructure, and distributed computing. Always willing to expand his horizon, he holds multiple publications and patents to his name. Tom Gibson is a principal and head of strategic solutions at Alcor. He brings over 25 years of experience in leadership, P&L management, managed services, cloud and SaaS solutions, AI and machine learning, infrastructure, and application outsourcing. Prior to joining Alcor, Tom served as managing director for Excel, where he was responsible for new client acquisition, technology partner programs, and digital transformation. Prior to Excel, Tom held leadership roles for CAI, Unisys, and Xerox. Now that you have met our panelists, let's dive into today's topics. This one's for John. When you joined the MacArthur Foundation just under 10 years ago, your plan was to transform the foundation's IT infrastructure to better serve its global operations. Can you describe your journey?
Sure. So it was interesting. I knew that MacArthur was a global operation based in Chicago, and at the time 4 international offices. The headcount of the foundation is smallish, around 200 people, but the work we do and the funds we have are significant. So we have the ability to sort of execute and expect an enterprise level set of capabilities. So I knew that things weren't going well. It was sort of a turnaround situation. And what I saw and learned was that the team was really structured for support and maintenance. An example I'll highlight is that there wasn't a project manager because there really wasn't a lot of projects. It was just sort of a run and maintain scenario. I saw a lot of custom code being used, a lot of on-premises physical infrastructure. In fact, I was told, you have a big problem, John. We're running out of space in the server room, and couldn't really understand why. And I mentioned the headcount, but we had something like 200 virtual machines at the time. So I knew that the prior strategy or direction really had to change. And the trick in the puzzle was to define a strategy that I could execute against, and to figure out an approach that made sense in terms of sustaining what we had, but also got us on a road to some fairly rapid change.
And now, Suresh, you started your organization in 2019, without the burden of having legacy systems and processes. What considerations did you take when setting up your company?
Sure, Jeremy. First up, thank you so much for that intro. For a startup, John was mentioning, it was very different from a corporate or a mature company, right? So you have processes in place. For us, the first step is to really find people who are as passionate as you are, right? So that's the first thing, especially on a startup. The second is grit. I think that's probably the most important among all of it. You have to have your organization and people carry a lot of grit. So you will fail again and again and again. It's given. And you have to be able to stand up and get running pretty quickly. The next biggest quality is their ability to really thrive in ambiguity. Ambiguity becomes a feature in startups while it's not really a good thing in large organizations, right? So you have to be able to run through it. One other thing that we always kept in mind is, as an organization, we have to be diverse. That's very important because all perspectives have to come together if you were to have a successful organization. That's important. As any leader, the next aspect for startups, right? It's the same, it's indistinguishable. So organization and people, because you have, let's say 25 people, and first 5 founding team would be really small, and it's really organization and people are almost the same, identical, if not at least indistinguishable. The fourth aspect is tenacity. So right now, when you fail, it's important that you learn what you really have to learn and get up and running again, right? So if you miss that learning part, you will make the same mistake. And you, as a startup, one thing you cannot afford is repeating the same mistake. You have to be creative at it, right? So you can make mistakes, but be creative at it. The fifth aspect is your ability to prioritize ruthlessly. That's where most transformation comes in, right? So you cannot, in fact, most important things will still be in the backlog for a startup, where you will probably find it in under number 5. They will still find a place in backlog because you don't have resources. One thing you have limited is the resources. So you have to be ruthless in prioritization. The next most important aspect is the culture that supports innovation and transformation. The taxonomy that you use, the words that you use, it should convey the same story for your customers, for your partners, and for your investors. It means you have to build that right from scratch. Those are the key aspects that we kept in mind when we built the startup. Over to you.
Thank you. And Tom, Alcor focuses on building a strong relationship through partnerships. You've actually helped many clients with their digital transformation journey. What do you feel has led to their success?
Thanks, Jeremy. So many organizations are already on their digital transformation journey, which typically includes hybrid, cloud, multi-cloud, all as the backbone for their platform. So, in our experience, clients are looking for partners that can enable and accelerate their journey, right? And the common thread that we're seeing for success is a true partnership between providers and clients. And that's really the key to be able to provide that measurable value to the business, right? And the clients that don't embrace in partnerships and treat strategic providers like vendors wind up with a less optimal solution or result. And it's typically less optimal for both the client as well as the provider. We're also finding that when best of breed partners are embraced, there's a higher probability of realizing the maximum value in the shortest amount of time. We also have focused on client intimacy, and providers need to collaborate with other providers in the client's ecosystem to maximize the value. Some of the things that we do, whether it's handling level 4 support tickets or delivering journey mapping through the alignment of the provider and the client roadmaps, that enables the collective us to really efficiently deliver more meaningful business outcomes, right? And then, one of the other things that these managed services partnerships bring to the table is, they give clients access to a wider range and depth of talent and resources that some clients either don't want to pay for or can't really pay for.
That's good. And John, with you as how are you as the CIO leading digital transformation, and how have you seen it impact the structure of MacArthur Foundation?
Yeah, so that is a good question. I sort of wanted to add on to what Tom was saying. So for me, once I understood where we were at, I needed to articulate a strategy. And I think early on, a lot of that was pretty tactical, right? It was about enterprise systems. It was about our physical infrastructure, a lot of our core capabilities. And in 2012, the timing was good and right for taking advantage of cloud-based systems, SaaS applications. And so the way I went about articulating that and communicating that was that at a base level, we needed to make sure like our core functions were working, reliably at a high level of quality and securely, right? And the and of security is not insignificant by any means. And so some of that had us asking what makes us great, whether it's the foundation or the IT team. And I came into that with a point of view. I mean, what makes us great is not running awesome email services. When email doesn't work, it's pretty painful. But and again, 2012, there was services that did that. So that got us on a path for Office 365. Patching servers, firmware, infrastructure, supporting and monitoring and maintaining that stuff doesn't make us great. It's really important, but that's sort of a commodity function. So talking about that in that way opened the door to working with managed services. And over the years now, we've worked with a number of different firms in different capacities, ranging from infrastructure to security as a managed service. And to Tom's comment earlier, what I've learned over time is a couple things. One is you can't delegate the responsibility, you still own that. But it's important that those relationships get set up and function as a partnership. And I think to the extent that that can happen and happen well, it's a reflection of a healthy business relationship. And so, it's important to find a good partner and find a good fit, because when you're working that closely for whatever that period of time is, it's really important that you've got that partner with you. So in terms of communicating that, what I talked about was to our staff, getting our house in order, which is our infrastructure and day-to-day operations, bringing in new capabilities around project management, business analysis, and then getting a deeper, more intimate knowledge of the functions of the foundation, and then partnering to not just be a service provider, but be someone who's at the table figuring out what the best way is to create solutions. And of course, the IT team, our toolbox.
Did we lose audio with John?
I
It
think we
looks like
did.
it's paused.
No, yes.
So John, we lost you when you said the IT team.
Oh, shoot.
You were talking
Yeah.
about the toolbox, and you said in the IT team.
Yeah. So right. So that's being presented as a business partner, right? And our toolbox is the IT equipment. But it was important to talk about that evolution in a hierarchical way, so that our colleagues understood, we're not just a service provider, but we're also there to partner and provide solutions.
Yeah. And I remember, because I actually met you during that initial project with the Office 365. And a
Yep.
big part of it was also with the staff, teaching them new skill sets. Instead of them focusing on how to manage Exchange servers, what can they do now with some of the new features and functionality that comes with the full suite that you get with Office 365 now, of course, Microsoft 365. But those were good times that we had to kind of educate people and help them along on that path.
Yeah, and it's I'll say I'm hearing Suresh talk a bit jealous of that sort of greenfield approach where you can do what you want to do from day one. And at MacArthur, which is a 43-year-old organization, it was very much fixing the airplane while we're in flight and making sure the trip is as smooth as possible. So definitely transformation opportunities in both cases, but may require different approaches.
Yep. And so that leads me to Suresh. So what do you see as the main principles for digital transformation, and how have you with Sedai assisted customers with autonomous cloud management?
Sure. Right, first step, I think it's called transformation for a reason. It takes time, right? You have to really start small but strategic. Always the first POC, the first child, the output is something that leaders are watching out for. You have to have measurable outcomes that really pulls them into this transformation, and you get a lot more partners with a lot more zest to really continue this journey. So that's one. So start small but strategic. The second is be customer centric. 5 years ago, we used to say, pick the technology that really helps the customer, right? I think now technology is probably the business too. So it's hard for you to prioritize one over the other. So always make a point to keep customer at the center of everything you do. That's extremely important. That will really get business and the rest of the departments also aligned to what you are doing. And one thing that generally I see people getting into is the security aspect. So you have to watch out for security issues. So watch out for that and make sure that you are secure at all times. If you're moving, even if it's a lift and shift, you still have to keep your eyes. Watch out for that. So that's one thing that I will give as a warning. It's not really a principle. It's really something that you have to keep an eye out for. The fourth aspect is you need partners and you need expertise to do this. So seek out for the right partner and the right expertise. Most of this journey, you need a team that has seen this movie before, right? So that's a lot easier then. And that's something that would help. That's where I'm assuming Alcor is also helping a lot. So you need such partners to really do this journey. And from our perspective, once transformed, ideally, you will have a very different landscape. You are going to see developers pushing code probably a lot faster. Things get released quicker. Testing is probably not taking a day anymore. It's probably hours. And you will have a lot of dependencies that need to be managed as well. A lot of tickets coming in. So it's a good landscape. It's a busy landscape, but you need a different set of tools to manage it. That's where I think Sedai really comes in. So in that new landscape, you will need not just automation, you have to start being autonomous. Wherever possible, try to be autonomous, and that's what we help with. In most cases, when you have a modern system, you cannot expect people to click buttons and do something. You may have to rely on a system that uses probably machine learning or data to figure out what's wrong, what's right, and start taking actions not really triggered by the user. In this process, yes, ticketing is involved, budgeting is involved, validations are involved, but everything is autonomous. So that's where we come in.
Yep. And I just had a meeting this morning with a customer, and as we're looking at, as we look at deploying code, they actually want to turn around and conduct their tests in line. So instead of having the code get deployed, the application is out there, and a week later, the security team says, hey, you have some vulnerabilities. No, it's not even qualified for production until it's tested. And that's part of the autonomous process.
Yep, exactly.
Yep. So Tom, how have you seen the cloud change the way businesses create value?
So today's digital enterprises are really looking to scale the speed, productivity, and innovation of the cloud across the entire organization, right, to change the way that they're doing business. And, we're seeing that they're realizing a lot of benefits as a result of it, right? I mean, the business environment is only growing increasingly competitive, and organizations are striving to mitigate disruption and take advantage of every opportunity everywhere, right? Enterprises are wanting all the maturity of on-premise and colo infrastructure, and they're increasingly moving to the cloud, right? Some are just looking to realize the benefits that come along with the speed of DevOps, right? The challenge is to scale beyond those pockets of innovation. DevOps, it needs to be at the core of every business's digital transformation and become the standard operating procedure across the entire enterprise. So, many organizations are using DevOps and SDLC for their dev environment today, but we're seeing the more mature enterprises leverage DevOps in test and prod as well. And John touched earlier on the and is not insignificant in and security. And, initially, the reason most organizations weren't going to the cloud was security, right? But that shifted in a big way now. And, it's one of the main reasons that organizations are going to the cloud and realizing benefits like SecDevOps, right? The cloud's breaking down work into microservices, dramatically increasing the complexity. But at the same time, it's enabling the development teams to respond quicker and more specifically to customer needs, because they can build those very discrete functions. So, clients who are adopting the approaches are creating and realizing more value. Business is being measured differently, right? It's being measured in successful release frequency, demand for zero downtime, instant access to innovation, and all of this, is pretty soon going to be at a cost that is less than their current spend.
Yep. And John, kind of going back to what we were talking about from your last question, how are you as the CIO creating a change resilient culture and driving successful change communication and implementation strategies across the organization?
Yeah. So I think there's a through line here. I find myself, I guess, in my role and personally talking about technology in terms of the value and capabilities we're providing back to the foundation, and coming into a turnaround type of situation. Change management was huge. For example, we had a legacy custom grants management system, and that's sort of our core ERP. And we had a leader who was confused or asked me, I can't understand why you're not stepping up to lead this effort. And I was quite aware of the importance of executing it, and I did not want it framed as a technology project, right? I mean, this is the core business of the foundation, grant making. And so what I needed to do to be successful there was to have that functional partner. So to the resiliency topic, I think there's a couple of paths. One is continually reminding people of why are we doing this, and it isn't. And I think the things we're talking about, like around KPIs and uptime, et cetera, are really important. And as technologists, we need to really keep our eye on those. But when I communicate with my functional colleagues, I'm talking about business results. So the resiliency topic, the recent, I hesitate to say best example, is as we all went through in the spring of 2020, we turned relatively quickly, and depending on where you were at, maybe it was on a dime. We, at that point, had a modern infrastructure, and my boss said, I'm concerned about what we're going to do. What's our business continuity plan here? And I said, people just need to go home and work. And so that event, right, going remote, people who were not well-versed or comfortable with AV, Zoom or Teams, quickly adopted. We use Teams for collaboration. And so we collectively demonstrated as an organization how we could make those changes. And so I use that as a reminder when we're dealing with, oh, I can't do this, or, this is hard, or I need training. We've demonstrated those capabilities. We have different ways of learning now, online training, computer-based on-demand sessions. So I think I remind people that we've done this under, duress, right, under challenging situations. I think the other thing is resiliency in terms of my staff is, again, tying into the bigger picture. We're fortunate at the foundation, to work at a place that literally every day tries to make the world a better place. And so, if you're buying into the big picture, that's hopefully going to create some intrinsic motivation. And then you've got to get the connections from, I'm implementing a Zoom room and 12 conference rooms. What does that have to do with making the world a more just place? So, tying those things together helps as well.
Yeah, and definitely when you and I were prepping for this event, and thinking back to that time in March 2020, I was working for a company where we had a Mad Scramble. Our VDI environment, though, was in the cloud, so it was easy to scale it up. And so we tripled the size of our VDI literally overnight in order to account for what we needed to do to keep the business running.
Yeah. Yep. I think a lot of business leaders were surprised and impressed about really the capabilities that IT teams were able to bring to bear. I think we're fortunate at MacArthur to not have a lot of heavily regulated parameters around our work. I know in the financial industry, I'd heard from other peer CIOs that they'd instructed staff to disassemble their desktop computer and take it home. We were in a fully mobile environment, so that was a lot more straightforward, but, it all got done, one way or another. And I think, as IT leaders, we've got to take some pride and energy from that.
Definitely. And Suresh, we talked about, when you have your cloud modernized, there are 4 things that come into play. You need to be paying attention to security, as you talked about a little bit earlier, availability, performance, and efficiency. So how is this handled with modern environments with microservices and serverless versus legacy systems?
Sure. So let's take a graph. So let's put scale on the y-axis and let's put modernization on the x-axis. Right? If you have scale and still not modernized, you have to start thinking of coming out of this manual operations. So generally, when you are at the bottom is the only place you can afford to be operating manually or throwing people at the problem, right? The moment you start going up, including transformation or modernization, you will have to think of one, automation, and soon start thinking of being autonomous. So automation plus smarts is really autonomous. So you know what is going on. You add some data and model into it. Now you can think like an operator now, right? Your system can think almost like an operator, like a Tesla of driving, right? Similar. So rather than saying take a left, Tesla starts taking a left, which means it's a very different ballgame. You are taking the whole availability, security, and everything into consideration, and you're still trying to drive it. So that's really the case here. And the key aspect there is, now what is this modernization bringing you, right? So as I mentioned, deployment, innovation velocity, feature readiness, go to market, everything benefits from it. You can scale up when the business asks for it. You can scale down and be efficient when the demand is gone. So all those aspects are awesome. But at the same time, now you have a lot of dependency. You had a monolithic before. Now you have 10 systems doing the same thing. They are all interconnected. And people release to one part and not to the other. So you have to make sure that all these systems work together. That's where ticketing and everything come into play. And now, before you had 10 services, now you have 1,000 services. If it was 20 services, it was easy. Now suddenly it became 1,000. Now you cannot expect a team to look at all 1,000 and say, yeah, things are working fine, or this is an inefficiency here, we have to fix it. That's where you start thinking about first automation and try to be autonomous. That's what, excuse me, that's what most systems do in this landscape. Most companies try to do, if you look at Google and Facebook, right? So they all try to be as autonomous as possible, where you don't have to really call people in for incidents. And if there's an incident like the one that happened before, yes, there could be cases where BGP gets messed up and you will have to call people in. But in most cases, you have to have an autonomous system managing it. That's really the key in having one modernized system, second, managing it, third, managing it efficiently. So in all three cases, you need to have automation first, then think of being autonomous.
Right. Yeah, and that can actually pave the way for self-healing. So in that case, which you were mentioning, if they were able to identify much quicker what the problem was, probably even have the system revert back the change and get the systems up and running in a much shorter time window than 6 hours.
Exactly. That's why they say there are three things in play, right? Skill set, mindset, and lastly, tool set. So you need to first start with the transformation, but you need to have the right tool set to be able to operate efficiently in this new technology landscape.
Yeah. And so, Tom, what initiatives have you seen companies embrace and when they are further along in their digital transformation journey?
So we're seeing the more mature clients really taking a holistic approach, right? And leveraging platforms a bit like Suresh was talking about to deliver new capabilities that, maybe weren't even on the radar, right? Like managing, the entire enterprise spend, right? And it starts by engaging the business earlier in the process, at the ideation stage, managing through the full life cycle of business management, IT financial costing, enterprise service management, right? So we're currently in the last stage of migrating 3 large disparate systems onto a single platform to manage an entire 5-year budgeting process for one of the largest cities in the United States, right? And it's pretty simple, right? I mean, it starts with self-service, never leaves the business demand digital platform from the initial request through to funding, right? Until the solution is actually delivered into production and handed off to the support life cycle that's already running on that same platform. We're starting to see multiple examples of this. We have some live solutions already in the state of California for some of the counties and the cities. So, that's really what we're seeing from the more mature clients, right? That out of the box thinking that we weren't even really talking about prior.
And to take a little step back, John, when we connected about this event, you mentioned that MacArthur Foundation and other organizations in your sector are not able to actually leverage technology to advance their use of data. Can you explain a little bit about what you are doing to improve the use of data in the philanthropic sector?
Sure. It's interesting sort of looking at the landscape as a whole. I would say that we are behind. And foundations are interesting businesses, right? We're not driven by profit. Typically don't have pressing timelines like, quarterly reporting, things like that. And so I think in the past, technology as a change agent and asset for transformation has really struggled. I think for MacArthur and me personally, a benefit of having gotten to this side of it is that I'm now spending more of my time sort of externally looking either to the sector and say, how can we, MacArthur, have a strategic impact, or how can we, MacArthur, within the organization work more strategically? So, I'm making a comparison to other industries or verticals where there are data standards and where it's beneficial, there is sharing of that data. FinTech is a space that is really kind of exploding right now. And you see lots of smaller and early stage companies creating APIs and ways to better connect these systems. And so what the philanthropic sector doesn't really have is good established standards. We do, we're not competitive generally, so there is a willingness to share data. So currently MacArthur and a half dozen other funders are working together and focusing on the beginning of a life cycle process, which is the application phase, and saying, and you mentioned my higher ed background, so this is something I experienced there. But looking at an application phase and saying, is there any common information here that could be reused by a grant seeker as they seek to make grant requests across funders? And we're finding that, yes, there is a fair amount, around 40% of that data can be reused. So the question is, so how can we take that information, put it into some sort of repository, either a data trust or a data commons, and then work with various participants in this ecosystem through standards and interoperability to get that data flowing programmatically from entity to entity. So, this has a lot of appeal and a lot of interest. There's a lot of actors in this space. So we're at the point where we're going to be sharing proof of concept in the next few weeks. And then from there, we'll either iterate on that or go into a pilot and start to actually use real data and make real grants with real dollars. So it's an exciting time, and the technology is not new by any means that will enable this, but the feeling is that this is an appropriate time, both because of the pandemic, because of equity reasons, to shift the power to the grant seekers and give them the capabilities of controlling their data and also allowing them to work more effectively and efficiently in terms of how they might make multiple grant requests to different funders.
Yeah, I know I wasn't a grant seeker for a Genius grant. Probably should have come up with something earlier on in my career for that. But
well, there's still time.
As a grant seeker before, when I worked in a nonprofit sector, I remember a lot of those aged web-based grant application forms and trying to go through that process. And in one particular case, I had 40 sites that I had to submit for, and I had about 3 forms per site, and it was grueling. So we had to be a little creative on how we filled in that info, but I think where you're going with this will definitely help those grant seekers.
Yeah, and sort of going back earlier to something Suresh was talking about, which is that, keeping the user at the center of this, right? So as part of our transformation, we've moved to an agile process. So we've got 2-week sprints. We utilize human-centered design extensively. And so when I'm talking about this data commons and data sharing, what we need to do, and this is frankly a bit new for us, is put that grant seeker at the center of our work, right? And what is their experience like? What are their pain points? How can we get this value proposition right to make it worth it for them to engage and be willing to share their data? And I think like that fits part and parcel into a transformation. And I feel like a benefit of having gone through this, I don't know, a couple chapters or iterations of the transformation, I now have a strong team that can run the operations, and I can spend my time working more strategically, throughout the sector or within the organization. So, that, human-centered design and having that customer, if you will, at the center is really, really important.
Most definitely. And being able to shift your focus to that strategy and where you can go with it. It's a much better use of your time. Cool.
Yeah, and much more satisfying.
Yep. And Suresh, once a company has migrated to the cloud and they've completed their digital transformation, what do you see for them as the next goal?
Sure. So in my mind, transformation is not really a destination, it's a continuum. So you will have to make sure that it stays as you wanted it to be and it continues. That's one. In other words, only the modality changes. You don't have to maintain the same zest, but you still need to watch out for things that may creep in, which might revert what we just did. So it's extremely important to attain that autonomy with the smallest of the system to the largest, wherever possible. So we have to get out of the strategy of mostly throwing teams at a problem and give it to an automated or autonomous system so that it runs all by itself and your transformation sticks. And the most important aspect after that, the point after that, I think, is innovation velocity. So that it was a nice to have before, not anymore. If you look at 2014, I think 30% of respondents said they have never deployed an application, a new version, into the market. But now, every 11.7 seconds, there is a deployment on AWS Cloud. So which means companies are now deploying fast, and that has become a barometer for high-performing teams. So innovation velocity, in my mind, is going to be the focus after the modernization. And with the current landscape, especially technology coming in, as John mentioned, it's not anymore easy to say it's done and expect you to be still the leader in the market. You have to be getting your features out quicker. You have to make sure that people can test continuously. Everything has to be continuous. Now everything has to start looking autonomous too. So that's really the focus for most leaders once transformation is done.
It does make sense. And like I said, with my clients that I've been talking with, it is the next area that we're going into, is how to be more efficient, covering all the topics that you've hit upon. You know, how do we turn around and take that autonomy? And like I mentioned in my last comment before, about getting to the point of the environment even self-healing, so that the only alerts that you have to deal with are true anomalies. Sorry, need to take a sip of water too. If you've already documented the process to fix something and you identify what are the triggers that cause that alert, or what are the alerts that you can trigger off of, however you want to phrase it, you could then take the autonomous action to fix the environment and come back and say, yep, we saw an issue, but it's already taken care of.
That's right. And the next step would be, how can you just avoid the thresholds 100% completely? Not define the percentage of CPU when you have to get an alert and let the system figure that out, right? And the next step would be, don't worry about the CPU, just worry about the customer. So what is the latency that you want the customer to experience? What is the error that you want him to, or the tolerance to error? So yeah, that's a journey. We'll continue.
Yeah, and with this, at this time, we're actually open to a Q&A. Please post any questions you have to the Q&A, and we will go through them. I did receive 3, so I'll go ahead and take a look at these right now. The first one actually is for you, John. So how would you measure and define checkpoints to the transformation that you are trying to bring? And how would you strategize a way ahead and a backup at the same time?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think there's a couple ways of measuring things. One is, in the conversations with the functional partners, the business, and I think that centers around capabilities and user experience. So there you may be measuring things like, are there new services you're deploying? Has your uptime improved? If you've eliminated downtime? I think, and this is sort of an old saw, but so if you look at the organization or the IT organization, you look at the people you've got, the team, and so some of that measurement is, do we have the right team? And the first part is an assessment, and then some sort of strategy for making changes. And in my case, I'd say that probably 80% of the team changed over time. And so to the backup part, that had to happen in a specific way, so that we had continuity in terms of the team. And while we were still supporting older technologies and, gain new capabilities. The technologies that you're using, there's any number of measures. We looked at technical debt. I mentioned the 200-ish servers. It is not as simple as server counts, but each of those sets of servers were related to certain functions. Jeremy mentioned Office 365. So an initial linchpin for us was getting our email off-prem and to the cloud, and that freed up time, tons of space, and dozens of servers, I think. Similarly with SharePoint. So that's another measure, but your functional colleagues are not going to care about that, nor should they. But I can say that if we're not worried about spending the weekend patching Exchange servers, we can be doing a lot of other things. I think a couple other important capabilities, and this was then a reflection of what felt more like maturity, was having an established functioning governance process, so that we had a cross-foundational team that was prioritizing the work. And I was adamant that it not be IT work. These are the foundation's projects, not IT projects. Obviously, there's technology as part of that. So that was another big part. We, with our partner, follow an ITIL process. So as part of our ITSM approach. So we have a CAB, and in that change advisory, we look at a couple of things. How many emergency changes do we have? How many plan changes do we have as percentages? And then what is the success of those changes? And so, that institutes a level of rigor. And if you're in the high 90% on your successes, that I think says something about the way the team is functioning. And of course, in that CAB, we always want to know what the fallback or backup is. So those are probably just touching on different types of metrics, but hopefully that's helpful.
Definitely. And actually, in looking at question 2, I think you've answered that to the most part as far as how you handle things at MacArthur Foundation, as far as you're creating a culture of digital transformation and working on that skill set. But I'm going to turn this question over to Suresh now. So the specific question is, how was culture of digital transformation developed, and how did your organization make sure that the skill set improvement of current employees was aligned to that digital transformation journey? You're starting from scratch, so you had a lot more flexibility there. Suresh, I think you're on mute.
I think he might just be frozen.
Yeah. Let's give him one.
There, I think you're back
more
now,
second.
Suresh.
Am I back?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Oh, perfect. Wow. Okay. So John, the same thing happened to me.
Okay.
It was on the culture, right? So yes, as a greenfield, I was lucky that I didn't have to really worry too much about what they were doing before. So that was a good part. But at the same time, making sure that you have the organization with the right innovative mindset, or ready for transformation, ready to take changes, right? That's hard, because that's a human tendency that always you try to keep that momentum and go in that direction, right? So that's something that we kept in hiring itself. When we started taking people in, we wanted to make sure that we are hiring for attitude first. So the rest of it comes really later. That's one thing that I think John probably or Tom did not have, and I had. So that's one thing, that's one opportunity that I had, because we were starting it from scratch. Now about the cultural changes, if things go wrong, especially for a startup, you have to really evaluate the opportunity, the price of that opportunity, and how much can you delay the transformation, right? For startups, for a new company, opportunities are almost everything. So we are always looking for that product market fit. We always have that sensor on. So when we see that, we don't see anything else. So that's one thing that we have to keep in mind. When people are after a product market fit, that becomes a sole focus. So that's the only time when you can delay your digital transformation, or for that matter, any modernization effort. And except for that one thing, which is really customer centric, we always give priority to that transformation. That was our recipe.
All right. Yeah, and in a lot of environments where I've either been as an employee or been as a consultant, I often look at ways to jumpstart that knowledge, get somebody onto the team, even if it's just for a short-term contract, to turn around and up that skill set among the team, and then help mentor people so that they are paving their pathway so that they could go towards that future state. The situation in some environments, you have people who have a strong understanding of the legacy environment, and you know that the day is coming when that environment's going to be shut down. So what do you do? And if they have an aptitude to go down a path that focuses on some of these more, modern architectures, modern services, I help guide them to that.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I totally
Go ahead,
agree
John.
with that. And we had and this is to the keeping the backup. So lead developer on this custom grants management system was very uncomfortable with transitioning to a new one. I mean, it was, his baby, right? And that's uncomfortable and painful. And so, he got through that, is now, very proficient in Ruby and Liquid Code, and is doing well. There's a phrase I'll sort of modify slightly, which is that change occurs at the speed of trust. So it's important for the IT leader, to be authentic and present and behave with as much credibility as possible, and as well as honesty, right? And acknowledging the contributions of people who've gotten us to where we are, but also acknowledging like where we are isn't where we need to be, and that can be a very challenging situation, and absolutely is disruptive. So it's for an IT leader, that kind of situation is challenging.
And the last question's for Suresh. As an entrepreneur and pretty much defining your own transformation model, how do you balance the risk and opportunities based on sorry, I'm having a problem reading this part. How do you balance the risk and opportunities? It could be different verticals every time for implementation, calling vulnerability scenarios.
Got it.
Trying to think how to rephrase that.
Yeah, I was also thinking of that. Okay. So as I mentioned before, so one thing that we have, in fact, two things we have limited. One thing limited by nature, second limited by opportunities, right? So one is resources, second is opportunities. That's something that a startup, especially our size and at this stage, would never want to miss out on, right? Opportunities are hard to come. At the same time, it only takes one security incident to really bring everything down. So we understand that, and the whole industry understands it. You know how much Facebook lost in the last incident, right? It was a very small incident, one BGP route getting messed up. It took days for them to get it back. In fact, hours for them to get it back in. So that's why we have to be very careful when you take that risk. So as I mentioned, except for a thing that will help us with our product market fit, anything that becomes risky, especially from a transformation or a security perspective, takes the first place. So if you see something, that's one of the reasons why we are taking certification very seriously, because that's something that you need to really have. The last segment of the question, I'm not getting super clarity there, but in general, when you have multiple verticals competing for anything, I always think security takes precedence. And I hope I answered the question. The second part is not super clear to me.
Right. Well, if we don't have any last comments or questions, oh, actually here, one did just come in. So let's go to Tom. What would be the one advice you would give to make the digital core to driving value for companies?
A good question. I think it really starts out with, the business case in the beginning and a well-defined business case, right? So, is the juice worth the squeeze? Do you have the right stakeholders involved? Do you have the right resources? Do you need to engage partners? Do you need to engage, best of breed partners, right? These days, organizations are looking for, the larger entities to really be that single back to pat or throat to choke, depends on which day it is. And so you want a partner that has that ecosystem as well. But going back to the business case, having a lot of checkpoints along the way, making sure that the stakeholders are involved, you've got the right resources, things are getting escalated very early on in the process, right? Because, it's not like wine, right? It doesn't get better with age. So, when it comes to really realizing that value, it's just a constant measurement from the business case through to steady state to make sure that all that's happening.
All right. You are correct on that. I mean, that's where you need to be focusing at that point. So we're at the end of the session. I wanted to thank you. So John, Suresh, and Tom, thank you for giving your time today to answering our questions. Each of you, that was very well thought out, and it gives us a lot to think about as well. It wouldn't surprise me if we also meet up again to have another conversation around some follow-up questions that'll be coming in from this. And it's a complete pleasure hosting you for today's session, and I'm sure our audience has had a great time learning as well. Thank you as well to those who attended. We will be meeting soon for our next session, which is tomorrow, October 14th. Stay tuned for more updates. This is Jeremy and our group of panelists signing off.
Thanks so much.
Guys, take care, everybody.
Thanks.